That's happening. So we are away with the recording. Awesome. Welcome to the April edition of the Tableau Prep user group. My name is Jenny Martin. I'm one of the leaders of the user group, and today I'm joined by Carl and Serena, who will be giving us presentations on all things Tableau Prep. So if this is your first time joining a user group, then welcome. Your leaders are myself, Jack Parry, who's over in New York, and then Jared Flores, who's over in Texas. They're choosing sleep at the moment rather than being at this user group, but I am here. And just to say, you may notice that Beth is missing now from the leaders slide. So Beth has decided with her family life and her work life, she'd like to step down from leading the Tableau Prep user. I want to say a massive thank you to Beth for all that she's done with the user group up till now, and wish her all the best with her family. So you may have noticed, hopefully, if you've joined today, that we're on a new platform called Bevy, shiny new platform. And if you've made it here, then great. You're seeing this, you know all about it. Make sure that you've joined so that you can stay in the loop with what's going on Bevy. And you'll notice the chat window on the right-hand side. So if we can drop Q&As, questions into the chat for the Q&As after the presentations, then I can ask them there. But yeah, if it's not expanded for you, then just look on the right-hand side. There should be like a toggle in the top right corner for you to be able to expand that. And let me know if there are any issues. We're still getting used to this new platform. So yeah, hopefully we can all work together to make it work the best that we can. So on that note as well, we sent out a survey on the Prep newsletter that we were running through the old platform to double check if it was still something that you're all interested in. And we got some positive feedback that yes, it is still useful. And even though we can't format it in the same way in Bevy, we can still send out all the content and all the links. So that will continue to run every odd month of the year. So thank you for getting involved and giving us your feedback there. That was really useful to see that it is something that is of use to people. So thank you. If you're interested in presenting at a future user group, then please use this link here to sign up, register your interest. We would love to have you. We're always kind of planning the next user group. So our next one, it will be in June. It will be American and APAC time zones. So please let us know if you're interested. Then even for any of the future events, any of the time zones, we'll find a place for you to be able to have a platform to speak. So please just let us know. We'd love to have you. And if you haven't already joined up to Tableau Prep Playground, that's another area on Slack where we're just congregating as Tableau Prep users and sharing interesting things, getting help, talking to the devs even who work on developing Tableau Prep. So another channel to be able to get your thoughts heard about Tableau Prep and make the product better all the time. And then it wouldn't be a Tableau user group this close to Tableau conference if I didn't mention it. So hopefully if you're going to be at Tableau conference, then it'd be great to see you there. Myself and Jack Parry will definitely be there. I think also Jared will be there too. One of our speakers, Carl, will be there. So it'd be great to meet up with you guys. And of course, I've got to do a couple of plugs there. I'll be talking on the Tuesday, 12:30 and 2:30 on creating the perfect data set for Tableau Desktop. And then excitingly, we also have Prep and Data Live running for the first time at Tableau Conference on the Thursday at 10:30. So please come along to both those sessions. Love to see you and hear your thoughts. But without further ado, let's get on with the Tableau Prep content for today at the Tableau Prep user group. So we'll start off with Carl's talk on more than just data prep, and then we'll move on to Serena's talk on the importance of cleaning ESG data. So without further ado, Carl, would you like to take the stage?
Morning, everybody, or evening, everybody. David dialing in from Alaska, just 11 p.m. at night to hear me talk. That's terrible, but I know you're actually here for Serena, and so am I, to be fair. That's who I actually want to hear from today. So let me just start sharing my screen and we can dive in for what I'm going to talk about today. So before we go too deeply, I'm actually going to get you all involved a little bit. Now, I originally built this session for Visit London, hence why I've crossed through that nicely on this slide, now using it for the Tableau Prep user group talk. That was an in-person session. So I kind of wanted to get a view of the room of who was I talking to. So how much had you used Tableau Prep? And then I kind of looked here and it's just kind of, it's not that Zoom format where you can put your hand up, etc. So all we have is the chat. So with the chat, what I would like you to do is ultimately put a heart in the chat if you use Prep really frequently, pretty much every day. If you use Tableau Prep only occasionally, do a smiley face. Or if you have never used Prep, or actually you're not sure why you're at a Tableau Prep user group, then let's do a sad face. So let's see what we've got. I'm glad Jenny's done a heart, otherwise I'd slightly worry. Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Para. David, heart. Got to be a heart if you're dialing in at 11 p.m. Lots of smiles, so lots of occasionally. It's good. Oh, Jaroslav, slightly sad face. Okay. Darius, sad face as well. Oh, Tom, double heart. Does that mean you never shut it? Jaroslav, only twice. Okay, cool. No, that's good. That's good. This is helping me try and pitch this at the right way. Tom using it right now. Bonus points for having Prep open and running a flow while you're listening to me. All right. Okay. Super useful. So thank you, everybody who's answered. David only a few times as well. Interesting. All right, so a big range. So bear with me while I kind of go through some of the basic content and just kind of position for everybody. There will be hopefully some nuggets of knowledge in there as well. Serena's gone from everything from a smiley to a heart, so that's sitting on the fence and getting a splinter, isn't it? but somewhere in there. Cool. All right. So what am I talking about today? When Visit, which was a Salesforce event, came up in London, it was kind of a way to do the Tableau conference, but in Europe, we used to have a separate conference. We haven't for a few years, COVID and everything else that's gone on. But I wanted to kind of reposition Tableau Prep because I think it's a tool that, for those of you who use it every day, hopefully you find it useful as I do. Or for those of you who haven't used it, hopefully you're here to go and find out more of how it can be useful for you. And I've found over the years from when I first sat in the conference, I think it was probably about 2016 or 2017, when Francois and the devs flashed up on screen this idea of this thing called Maestro that would help you prepare your data. I was intrigued not just about that data preparation part of what the tool could do, but what else actually could I do for it? Matthias, you are absolutely right. TC Europe, that is a big sad face. We're trying to get it back. Let's keep the face. We'll get there. We'll get there. So from that time of when it was just this idea of having data prep, but done in a Tableau way, where do we actually get to with that? And the more I use it as a tool, the more I realize there's alternate uses than just making a data set for Tableau desktop. And that primarily did sit at the heart of where Tableau Prep came from. When you go and look at the connect and the data source screen, when you're connecting to data in Tableau desktop, there was basically limited space for what could be done, and different things being built in over time. Like we can do a single pivot, we can go and split fields up if we need to. We've got some controls within that. But the challenge of what was happening was everybody needed something a little bit more complex. They were trying to prepare their data sets in many different ways. As we were using more and more data sets from many more different sources, they weren't all structured and ready for analysis. Tableau had to do something, and Tableau's way is, hopefully you all know and feel, isn't we'll just ram more features in the tool and it will be all right. They think about the UI, they care about the user and their experience that they're actually having. So what Tableau decided to do was create this Tableau Prep tool, and that's where it came from. So data prep, don't get me wrong, it's at the heart. It's designed to get data into Tableau Desktop and into Tableau Cloud and Server. But I want to highlight the other features because I think that helps win the arguments as why somebody actually might want to use it. But let's take a little step back. Clive Humby, who I've had the honour of meeting, he created dunnhumby, which was at the heart of our a very big retail initiative called Tesco Club Card, which was for a supermarket and using customer data and creating a truly data-driven customer proposition for the first time. He said in 2006, data is the new oil, and it got splashed everywhere. It was on the front of Forbes, and everybody sat up and paid attention because here was a guy who had taken data along with Edwina Humby, his business partner, and they'd created this proposition where data became such a valuable thing for the organizations who were holding it. And way before 2006, organizations were holding data and storing it and wanted to make use of it. And Few did, but very, very many didn't. So when Humby stood up and kind of quoted in an interview said, "Data is the new oil," everybody paid attention. Now, just like oil, data has to be refined. It's very rarely that finished product that you want to have when you first dive into it. And that's really kind of where we're sitting with this kind of concept of we've got to go and refine the data set, this asset that we have that we've managed to mine from somewhere, to go and pull it out and start using it and making use of it. And it's never been fun. It's never been sexy. We don't in the prep and data team have that kind of same kudos that the Makeover Monday crew and the Workout Wednesday crew do, because they create these beautiful visualizations that can grab attention on social media. The prep and data crew, we kind of feel like we're the workhorses a little bit, empowering all of that stuff behind the scenes, but it's such a useful skill set to have. Nobody invites out the data prepper to a party on a Friday night. Oh, woe is me, I know. But it's kind of really just not the fun and sexiest subject in the world. But they would absolutely kind of dive into the person who's really useful later in life, and just kind of spend time with them and know how much of a friend they are. And that's really where we are at with data prep. Because let's face it, most of those data sets that we're really touching on and using kind of look and feel like this, right? It's like a big mess of spaghetti that's just absolutely all over the place. Trying to find structure, trying to find meaning, trying to find order within a data set, it just doesn't work. So how do we get past that? What do we need to do? Well, we need to untangle everything. We want to go and create something that is structured, that's organized, that's solid, that frankly we can build upon. We're not just using data just for the fun of it. And really what we're trying to do with data is help empower and inform other people's decisions. You don't want to do that off a really wobbly foundation where you're not sure of the decisions that are being made because of the inputs that you've had into that if you're preparing that data set for somebody. So if we want that thing to be solid, to become trusted on ultimately, well, who had the skills to do that? Early on in my career, asking for this kind of work was the equivalent of taking your car to a mechanic and going, I don't think something's quite right about this. Can you help me? And it's that sharp, horrible intake of breath that is then going to cost you a lot of money to go and fix. Actually, data was really similar. For the organizations I worked for, passing data sets into IT to go and get that into your centralized databases, so you're holding it alongside everything else that you wanted to use, was frankly really painful and really expensive. You've got to go and dig out some decent budget for that. You've got to work really closely with those individuals so they understand your domain expertise, so they can make sure that data set is refined for what you want it to do. It would take a long time. That time aspect's really horrible, because if I've got questions that I want to answer now, I don't want to wait days, weeks, potentially months. Let's hope it's not years. But it was this bespoke skill set of preparing data to build that solid foundation, build that trust, was held away from everybody else. So even though back then when I started, not many people could even build the charts, that was solved with Tableau Desktop. We then have this thing of, well, I can solve my questions only if I can get hold of the data. And currently I'm still reliant on basically a data mechanic to go and enable me to be able to go and do this. That wasn't fun. So yeah, my journey's been a long one. It feels like a decade in financial services, and then off the back of that, about 8.5 years at the information lab. So last 4.5 years of that has been head coach, teaching people like Jenny and Serena all of the skills they need to do to go and kind of rev up their careers and create way better decisions and help organizations make better decisions with the power of data. I'm a Tableau Visionary, actually presenting from somewhere where I've got the stones today. There you go. We still get stones. Quite cool. I've been a social ambassador for years, a visionary for 4 years, I think now. But ultimately, a very heavy user of Tableau. That's what that tells you. I started with Tableau, I think version 5.2 was my first download of Tableau Public way back in the day. Really started using it every day with version 7 from 2012. So well aware of some of the shortfalls of the tool. It's not absolutely perfect. No piece of software is, but it enabled me and my team to go and do things that we wouldn't be able to do otherwise, to have access to answer questions and work with data that frankly I'd have been held at arm's length from otherwise, even though I absolutely had the skills and the knowledge and the capability to be able to do it. So that's that kind of dichotomy of I had the right questions, I had that curiosity, but I needed to go and be empowered to do it. Tableau was the tool that enabled me to do that. I worked with Tableau Prep lots from the early days. So in the end, I ended up writing my first book about Tableau Prep. So that's Tableau Prep up and running, published by O'Reilly. That went pretty well. So they asked me back to do another one. Second book was Communicating with Data. So that was looking at tool agnostically. How do we need to think about communicating with data and the power that that can have? So very much like other data viz books, if I'm honest, but I then focus on, in the latter part of the book, the work implications of that. How does that then fit into an organization? What does that mean for your career? What are some of those opportunities that are going to open up, but also some of the challenges that come with that? So that is communicating with data. And I'm currently working on my third book, Data Curious, which is looking at, for a more kind of leadership exec role, when they're starting to work with data for the first time. Because I don't know about you, but I've worked with a number of people who don't have that level of data fluency. They're trying to run projects that involve data, and it feels like data's just smushed to the side because it's not a concept or a set of concepts that they're comfortable with. They don't want to look like idiots in front of their people, so things don't go well. So we've written a short book to hopefully empower them, give them the knowledge they need, so we can all work together with knowledge on the actual challenges in front of us. But anyway, more importantly, let's go back to prep. That's way more important. So what is prep? For those of you who haven't used it that much, it's actually two tools. So I use the term Tableau Prep, like most people, to describe the on desktop or on your computer application that is Tableau Prep Builder. That's where you're going to go and connect your data first of all, create a workflow, so a set of transformations to basically clean and reshape your data sets to ultimately lead to an output that enables your analysis to be a little bit easier. We'll come back to that concept a little bit later and challenge some of that. If you want that process to be rerun, there is the option to have Tableau Prep Conductor on your server or cloud environment. That's where you can go and schedule those workflows. So you don't need to sit there at 7 o'clock every morning, or in David's case in Alaska, 11 p.m. at night, clicking run to go and run those workflows. You also have the ability with Conductor now to edit those workflows in your browser. So just in the same way that we can go and edit visualizations and have that in desktop in browser experience, we can also have that with Prep now. So that's really two parts. But when I'm talking about Tableau Prep, sometimes I'll signpost whether it's the builder, that application to build those flows originally, or Conductor, the scheduling of those workflows. I'll signpost those separately, but it is two tools. Hopefully that is everybody absolutely up to speed now, and we are ready to go into the good stuff. So many of you, even if you've only opened Prep a few times, you're used to this experience of building workflows. In simple ways, Prep ultimately boiled down the workflow experience into about 9 steps. Really, you're only going to use 7 of them, probably. Not many people will use the scripting element or the prediction element. Scripting, R and Python, not everybody is versed in that. That's kind of not who the Prep product is really based on. Because if you can script, you're probably writing those scripts separately, unless you're working in an organization that other people need that support to. Or whether you're using prediction and using some of that Salesforce Einstein technology to be able to go and make those, build prediction into your workflows. But really, cleaning data, reshaping it is really where you're going to spend most of your time. Prep really made that simplified. And I think that's what most people ultimately think about as the main use for Prep. And it is. But our problems and our challenges go beyond that. That when you work with data preparation, you've got some challenges around connectivity. How understanding, secondly, how complete your data set is. Trying to actually understand that data set is a challenge that I continually see people have, that often they're overlooking it, which is worrying. And as much as I talked about the improvement in the user interface and the user experience, and Will, I can see that you've got some challenges on that, and I don't disagree. Not everything is perfect. Tableau Prep is doing its best to unpick a lot of that complexity and make some of the more challenging aspects of the data preparation process a lot easier. I would argue actually some of the data analysis parts of your world a lot easier, and moving some of that back into Tableau Prep rather than trying to leave it all to be done in Tableau Desktop can change who is able to then do that analysis in your world. And like I say, for me and my teams that I've run over the years, that's actually really what's changed things. Whether it's actually building the charts in the first place, or as they become more sophisticated, doing some of the more complex pieces of work, like handling and understanding level of detail calculations, etc. So let's dive into these in a little bit more detail. So connectivity, I'm going to talk about how we can think about inputting data nice and easily and how we almost take that for granted now, but also understanding that input. That's what I'm covering with connectivity. I personally take it for granted that once I've learned a tool, I can pretty much connect to anything these days. I remember early on in my career, that just wasn't the case at all with the tools that I was using. We were using tools where often we'd have to go and connect to that tool directly to go and set up what we needed to do. Whereas what Tableau Prep's enabling me to do, just in the same way that desktop is go and connect to pretty much any of the data sources that I want to get hold of and start using. Whether that's the files that are sitting on my computer or on a shared drive in a network, or whether it's diving into one of those bigger server or database tools. It's a few clicks often to set it up, entering a URL if we're getting that complicated with the server environments. But that experience is then exactly the same. So I'm learning a skill set once, and I can apply it to pretty much most of the things I then come across, especially in the form of structured data. I know with unstructured data, there's still some improvements to make in the Tableau Prep world. Completely agree with that. But really, most of the data sets that I'm touching in an organization, day in, day out, I can go and work within Prep. It's simple to gain access and then go and drive from that. Really, the challenge of gaining access is that kind of filling in the forms, getting the permission to have read-only access to that data set, or maybe read and write if you've got that capability. That's one thing that is not solved by Prep, but they've tried to make it as simple as possible. As soon as I have those credentials to go and query in Teradata, as I used to at the bank I used to work at, then I could just use those exact same credentials in Prep or in desktop, and I'm ready to go. Let's not forget about that. That makes a big world of difference as a way to access data. But once I've accessed that data, that first thing of picking it apart and fully understanding what I've got is huge. I used to just swim in the amount of SQL tables that I had available to me in the retail bank. It was just a ridiculous number that were largely undocumented. They've been formed over time through different projects, different ways of doing things. But having a tool that could help me just go and see that data really quickly, check what I've got, check the completeness of it, made a huge difference. That ability to go and click on an individual value within one of the data fields and actually see the data that's coming back from that really helps me understand what I'm working with. When I first saw the profile pane, so there's the middle band within Prep, what I've got highlighted at the top of the screen here, that really helps me just go and pick apart, because that histogram was what I was building at the bank to go and really understand what was there, what was the profile of my data, were there any outliers, how many nulls there were within the data set. But yes, Matthias, maybe Power BI stole it and they've done it worse. I'm using Power BI a little bit more than what I used to, and it really annoys me within Power Query. That's not as dynamic as I'd love it to be. But anyway, side issues. Let's focus on Prep. But by going and selecting that mark, seeing what's there, allowed me to go and challenge back very quickly around the completeness of the data set. So if somebody was telling me this is the repository, everything's there, no, it's not because of this. Or we've got duplication that I can spot in the data set really quickly. That understanding, being able to get my arms around a data set, really helps me understand what I actually then need to go and do to it. But also then go and find alternate sources if I have to, if I haven't found the right bits, or work out if there are other data sources I need to join in or union in to go and complete the data set to be able to go there. At the data school, the way that we teach data preparation in whatever tool is you've got to go and work through 4 steps. So it's called planning your prep. Step 1 is knowing your data. Really understand that input. Spend time almost sketching it out to see what you've got, so you know that you're comfortable with the tool that you're working with, or fundamentally trying to start to turn that spaghetti into those solid bricks. That's kind of an absolute key part to dive into. So yeah, let's not underestimate that, even if that is more common in more and more tools. Let's think about completeness as our next section. This is where profiling comes in a lot more, but also how we can go and start to prototype what we're doing. So by that profile, I do mean that profile pane. That building those histograms is actually what I used to spend most of my time doing. When I saw that in that original Devs on Stage part at the conference in Project Maestro, and I saw the profile pane, I was a bit annoyed. I'm not going to lie. I was pretty frustrated because I was pretty frustrated that Tableau didn't already have that within the tool. Because I spent a lot of time connecting to those data sets and building these histograms on each field. Let's drag in row ID. Is it uniform across? Let's go and drag in my dates. Have I got a common number of records across each of my days, as I would expect in a certain data set? Being able to see that quickly without having to build histogram after histogram after histogram, saving me a huge amount of time. So having that ability just to connect to a data set in prep and have that do that for me, I still do that even if I don't need to prepare the data set. If I know the data set's been prepared for me and it's ready for analysis, for me to understand that data set, I still connect to it in prep first, see the profile, understand what I've got, and then I'll go and conduct my deeper analysis in desktop. That profile is just so rich and saves so much time. But one of those things around saving time is I might not have the same technology and capability as my IT counterparts who might have a lot more specialism in productionalizing workflows and everything else. But it doesn't mean that you should ignore prep. If you're going to go and profile your data in there, and then you find that you need to make a number of changes, I don't think there's anything wrong with actually using prep as a prototyping tool. To go and show your IT colleagues or whoever's going to go and do that productionalization, that ability to go and say, well, actually, I need to do this pivot and aggregate because I'm working at a different level of granularity in the way I'm then piecing that together, basically doing an LOD, and then going and doing some cleanup off the back of this. This is what I need to do to this data set. They can go and walk through it, see the changes are being made, understand your requirements way better than actually just, taking your car into the garage. Oh, I'm hearing a bit of a clunking. Can you fix it? If you're able to talk their language, if you're able to go and show them what you actually need to do, that becomes a lot more powerful. That's going beyond the basics of you just building a workflow. That's then being able to communicate the changes you need to do. That's super useful. Complexity. Creating data sets is ultimately creating complexity in organization. And often lots of our clients fear that by having a tool like Tableau Prep, you're going to create the wild west of data sources. For a long time, there's been this misnomer around this golden source of the truth. One table to rule them all. It's almost like Lord of the Rings, isn't it? It's like one ring to rule them all, one data source to rule them all. You can't create it. And the reason why I feel like you can't create it, and if anybody wants to read more on that concept, data mesh is a great concept to go and look at as a great way to articulate this. HR is always going to go and look at data differently than what finance will. If you go and ask an HR colleague how many people are there in an organization, they will absolutely give you a different answer to finance. And the reason for that is there's different lenses that we put over data sets, and that's fine. If it's coming from the same source, that's great originally, but they're going to have different lenses that mean the data source that they work from day to day will ultimately change. I love that concept. I love challenging that concept with people. It's always an interesting conversation when you get into that detail. But that ability to go and create multiple outputs for different teams and control those rather than creating a single output that people then go and squirrel away and do their own thing, that's where the pain comes in with those kind of proliferation of workbooks and data sources. If you can keep it together in a single environment, then that becomes a lot easier to govern and maintain. Also, in terms of complexity, we'll talk about those multiple stage workflows where you're trying to break down really hard things. Tableau Prep Conduct has brought in some neat features over the last 6 months to a year where it helps us do that. And ultimately, Prep makes your job easier, as I kind of alluded to with LODs earlier. So let's dive into each of those bits in a bit more detail. So bespoke data sets. Having the ability to now put in parameters, something I've long been fighting the devs for within Tableau Prep, and they've been trying for a while as well, but they've created a really neat solution with parameters, I think. To be able to go and allow a user to create their own outputs, have a field within the data or calculations that drive those fields, to be able to go and select what's relevant to them, what's relevant to their output, so they don't have to swim in everything else first when data sets are growing, when actually these things can then go and change the outputs when you select the different inputs or the different parameter values. That's ultimately is fantastic for people to be able to go and get the data set that's meaningful for them. The reason why I say that is, for lots of us, filtering data is really easy to understand and pick apart, as well as kind of the impact of, if I do this for a data set, this is the output. You're on a call at relatively early o'clock in the morning for most of us, or late at night. You know the subject, you care about it, that's why you're here. For lots of our end users of those data sources, that's not the case. We're still dealing with a lot of people who are on the lower end of that data fluency scale. That's absolutely fine. But we've also got to make data accessible and meaningful for them. So we've got to make it easier to use, i.e. reducing that complexity for them. So if we can create a data set that's more bespoke for them, that absolutely helps. Also can help us in speed of workflows too. But having that bespokeness is a really useful thing within that. One thing that I'd spoken about with the prep devs a little bit, and the joy of being a visionary, is we get decent access to the devs to kind of chip in ideas and kind of share some of those pain points. So for a couple of the pain points I've seen in the chat today, don't worry, I will play that back and reiterate some of those. Is this idea of taking big, over cumbersome flows and trying to break it down into meaningful parts. Because either that flow takes a long time, and if there's a fail, we've got to go and do it all over again, while actually having individual parts of that flow is used by multiple people. There's multiple dependencies on different chunks of that flow, so we've got to get it right. Well, actually, let's find a way to go and break up those flows into those important individual chunks, that then once that bit's run, those other dependent factors can carry on within your organization. Now, what Tableau Prep have done, and this is the screen that you'll see when you're working with Tableau Prep Conductor and scheduling those flows, if you're running what's called a linked flow or linked tasks in Prep Conductor, it's really easy to do it. It's about 4 or 5 clicks to go and say, hey, I want to go and create a linked task. Here's when I want to run it on a schedule, and here's the sections I'm going to select. Now, if you're a skeptic like me, you might go, I've got hundreds of workflows that are being run on my server. How am I going to find it? The prep devs have done it that whatever you select as your first flow, the next flow, they will look at the data source and also similar names, and then work out what needs to be dropped in. And then you can go and select from that shortened list, or go into the full list of everything that you've got on your server if the naming conventions aren't too tight. It makes it super easy. I can get emails if something fails. I can tell prep what I want to happen if something fails or not. This is a really nice experience. If you haven't had the chance to use it yet, and you do have Prep Conductor, dive in and have a look at it today, because it's changed how I think about building my workflows, and it's ripped out a lot of the complexity of horrendous big, like I say, very cumbersome flows, and simplified it a lot more. Then also simplifying for you. Visual calculations are beautiful. It's one of the ways I now teach level of detail calculations within the data score. That not only do we get this visual way of actually forming calculations, whether it's rank, tile, or fixed LOD for the moment, actually trying to see what's going on within the data, Prep's great at doing that for us. It simplifies that kind of calculation and that syntax for people into terms where ordering by and grouping by is a lot easier concept than trying to write some pretty complicated things within table calcs and then setting that up in that dialog box, even though that dialog has become much nicer in Tableau desktop over the years. But ultimately, Prep playing that calculation back to me so I can see how that's formed is super useful. It helps me really wrap my understanding around the tool. So when I then have to go and do something more complex that I can't maybe do in a default way through the tool, I then have a much better chance of actually going and writing it. So it's simplifying the formation of some of these harder concepts within data preparation, but it's also then showing me how and teaching me basically how to go and approach these things going forwards. Again, super useful, and I don't want to look past that. So yeah, that rank calculation, when that first came out, we had to start to edit those and build those from scratch. That was horrible. Very quickly, Prep changed to the visual editor for that, and that's made that a lot simpler. I'm actually kind of hoping they build it into desktop eventually. So if there's any devs listening, Just a little ask there. As to the desktop devs, Prep's got it already. So last but not least, coherence. For my final C of my 4 Cs, simplifying things for the end user. Already mentioned that a little bit. Making data more accessible. That's ultimately why we're doing this stuff, right? Yes, it's to answer business questions, but the reason why we're doing that is we want data to be informing the decisions that are made, solving those problems that exist within the organization. But ultimately, let's talk about doing things the Tableau way, because that is important. Getting the right data at the right time in the right format makes everything easier. The amount of times I see horrible workarounds in desktop workbooks or within visualizations because someone's wanted to do something, but the data hasn't been in the right structure in the first place. Having Prep as that data prep tool enables and has lowered the barrier to entry for everybody to be able to do that. So yes, I know I'm supposed to be talking about prep and how it's not just about data prep. I know this bit is, but I just wanted to reflect on it's really accessible and it's really easy to everybody. Whereas data prep before has been that skill just for IT, it's creeped into the business a bit more. For me, it should be a flood into the business, and most people should be thinking about having that ability to go and sort this out for themselves so they can answer those questions first and foremost. Oh, Matthias, you've added something in that I haven't put in this talk around documentation. It makes everything so much easier to follow the color logic flow through, having those little collapsible comments, and now allowing us to name those conventions. It just helps so much to be able to go and break that down and ultimately simplify those workflows. Absolutely. It also helps that end user understand what you've formed in the way of doing data, what prep has gone into it, what decisions you've made as that person architecting the data for them, so they can make the correct informed decisions off the back of it, rather than just getting a data set dumped on their desk and going, here you go, this is what you're going to use. Yeah, but I've got a question. No, I've got to get on to the next piece of work. Having that documentation, absolutely key. Yeah, really good point. Trying not to ignore how accessible data cleaning is by simplifying everything within the process. So lots of these bits have come over time from feedback from the community in the ideas forums, in the community forums, seeing the challenges that people have, like having the ability to not have to use regex to go and get rid of letters, and having these things in individual clicks work really well, all the way through to more complex pieces that, again, I'm absolutely at risk of being taken for granted around grouping and the algorithms to go and group strings together. So having pronunciation, spelling, and common characters, having those things available just to be able to do these things in different clicks completely makes understanding a data set much easier if you're removing a lot of that noise from within the data set. And also not ignoring the cleaning part, right? So it just works. Having that Tableau similar nature as what we have within desktop, which lots of people are now used to, of I want to do something to this field, I'll right click on it, let's see what options I get within the menu, having the ability to just keep only or excludes, but also making things easier than desktop with being able to get down to date parts really easily, really quickly, having those calcs then shown again. All of that works really, really well. If there's things that are missing in those common tasks that you're doing, you're finding that you're writing calculations for it, flag it up to the prep devs, as Jenny mentioned on that Slack group, or even in feedback and sessions like these. At the conference, if you're lucky to join, go and find the prep devs. I'm sure they'll be showing off the latest features and what they're thinking about what's coming up next. I think that's what we need to get built into the tool, because there's lots of things that are made way easier already within prep. We just need to kind of keep that rolling going forwards. So next time when somebody asks you what is Tableau Prep and they're just expecting you to say a data prep tool, hopefully you'll have a few more answers. It's making simple complex changes, or it's simplifying those complex changes. Because before, that was a big barrier for people doing this, where I don't think it has to be now. But ultimately for you, even when you get used to that and you get the capabilities to do that, having that ability to explore and get into the data set and understand the data set in a much stronger way will make everything else about your analysis much better too. And ultimately, I don't want to look past Prep Conductor. data management becomes a hell of a lot easier. That is just absolutely true, with just being able to manage your workflows in a much more coherent way, and also creating those linked tasks means that you can dive in and break down difficult subjects into much easier chunks and make those chunks reusable for others, which we haven't really had the option to do so far within Prep and some other tools, unless you're breaking up code. And then we're also getting into bespoke data sets as well. Ultimately, creating the right data set for the right person at the right time is why we're trying to do this. So at that point, I'll say thank you. If you're ever in London, you'll find me near St Paul's Cathedral. I liked how Salesforce created this slide just for me. They didn't, but I found us on there. So yeah, if you're ever in London, you want to talk data prep, then please do shout, or come and find us at the conference. We'll be walking around. Come and find Jenny or I, chip in prep and data ideas. Ultimately, my aim with Tableau Prep is not to help it just build into a really useful tool, but ultimately make that tool really useful for everybody for the tasks that they're doing. So if there's elements that aren't there for that, then let's start shouting about them a bit more and get those built in the right way. So hopefully this talk's helped you think about prep just a little bit different than what you did before, or maybe very differently if you're new to using the tool. And yeah, as Jenny said, if you've got any questions, feel free to drop those into the chat, and we'll do a little bit of Q&A, or I'll shush and we'll get to the main event, which is Serena.
Cool. Thank you so much, Carl, for that talk. I know that I've seen it before, but you always take something new away from it, and giving people that language of how to describe things is, yeah, I can't understate that, because I'm someone who struggles with words sometimes. I'm much more about the data. I do have a question for you that I was asked at the London Tug on Tuesday, so I thought it'd be fun to throw it to you as well. If you had the magic ability right now to get any feature that you wanted in Prep, what would be your number one thing that you want to drop in there?
That's
I
a really
also
good.
found
What
this
did
really
you
hard.
answer? I've got a couple of answers. So what did you
I,
answer?
I, I thought it was like trying to choose my favorite child. I went with text input. I was like, I think that
Oh,
would just
yeah.
help me so much, like on the fly, just create some quick changes, quick lookup tables. I think that would be a really useful thing to have.
Yeah, I'm actually going to go the other way, and I'm going to go more complex. I want spatial elements, as we're seeing more spatial calculations being built into desktop. I would really love more to push some of those spatial calculations into Prep, into the tool for how we're doing it. But I'll also reel off a few of my. I kind of want to see what other people want as well. Drop into the chat if you've got some features that you want to see in Prep, and I'll play those back to the devs. So feel free to start typing now. But I want things around making some of those common tasks in Tableau Prep easier. So when we're trying to find or understand if there's duplicates in our data set, all the way oh, there we go. It's just exactly as I said. Thank you. Yeah, deduplication. Much easier than just using the aggregate step. Heck yes. And then having to choose what we want to do with those duplicates, or email them out to a user to go and clean those up. Absolutely yes. Multiple row calculations. So instead of working just across columns, we can work across rows. So many things. But I think the spatial piece is where we just open up a whole load of new use cases, and it can ultimately augment our analysis a lot further, and I think that's quite exciting.
Definitely. Cool. Thank you very much, Carl. I'll let us look at those new features that everyone else wants whilst we get started with Serena. But thank you very much for your time today, Carl, and stick around in the chat. Cool, Serena, over to you.
Thank you. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay. Thank you for that intro, Danny. And yeah, I'm really excited to be here today. This is my first time speaking at any user group, any sort of group outside work. So yeah, a little bit nervous, but excited. I'm Serena, and I'm going to be talking about the importance of cleaning ESG data. So what I'm going to go through today, I'm first just going to introduce myself and my experience with ESG data. And then I'm going to talk about what ESG data is and why it's important, and why it's important that we have it in a clean, usable state. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about how Prep comes into that. And I'm going to talk about the prep and data challenge I created this week for those of you who may or may not have seen it. And then we're going to move into prep. And I'm just going to demo some of the cleaning steps that I've taken as part of that challenge. But hopefully there's not going to be too many spoilers. Okay, so about me. I have a background in international relations and statistics. This was the focus of my degree at university. And it was sort of my first sort of exposure to sort of data analysis. I really enjoyed the practical application of statistics to sort of social and political contexts. And yeah, this is why I sort of learned to tell a story with numbers and to get people engaged in thinking about statistics in sort of different contexts. And then after that, I moved to Spain for 2 years where I taught English before sort of thinking about how I could get back to what I loved about my degree, which was data. So I actually discovered Tableau when applying for the data school. I'd never used it before, never heard of it before. All my experiences of data analysis at university were predominantly with tables, sort of creating really clunky regression models in R. So it was a nice change to sort of be working with Tableau and Tableau Prep. And yeah, I quickly fell in love with the ability that of Tableau to be creative and sort of paint a really beautiful picture with the data. And yeah, I joined the Information Lab in November 2022 as part of DS36, where I've undergone training in Tableau and Tableau Prep, amongst other things. And since then, I've had the opportunity to work with some ESG-related data for some personal projects, which I'll talk about. So ESG and me. Before I'm going to move on, I want to sort of quickly define what ESG is for those of you who haven't heard about it before. So ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance. And it relates to sort of data that's used to determine the environmental efficiency and sustainability of companies and organizations. So my experience with ESG sort of started at university. My first experiences of data analysis were predominantly with ESG type data. And for my dissertation, I looked at sort of the environmental voting behaviours of members of Congress in the United States, and sort of looking to see if factors such as race, gender, and age sort of affected how politicians voted on environmental policies other than their political leaning. And as you can see on the left here, this is my first sort of map that I created using RStudio. And yeah, I probably wouldn't create something like that again with the sort of garish colour scale, the green and the red. But anyway, I remember it took me so long to create that because all my data that I had was really, really messy and I had to manually clean all of it in Excel because I hadn't heard of Tableau Prep. And yeah, I'm glad that I don't have to go through these sorts of things again. And then I actually used the same data set for my data school application. And you can see a little sort of screenshot of that in the middle there. So a bit of an improvement. And here I sort of wanted to look at temporal changes in environmental voting in the US. So a slightly different sort of narrative. And then, yeah, more recently, I've been able to use ESG data for some personal projects. On the right is one of my more recent visits in Tableau. And this is just looking at the gender inequality index over the world. And yeah, I think a vast improvement in sort of how I've been presenting my data. So yeah, I recently had the opportunity to create a prep and data challenge, which was really exciting for me because I've been doing lots of them during my time at the data school. And they're a really great way for you to practice your prep skills and to sort of get experience manipulating data and sort of try out new things and learn new ways to sort of change your data that you might not have used or done previously. Now, when thinking about what I wanted to do for this challenge, I had a really long, hard think. And I wanted to create a challenge that had a real world use case. So most of the other challenges in prep and data that I've done have been sort of business style data or mock data. And yeah, when I was thinking about the challenge, I was looking for data on the World Bank data page for a personal project. And I was finding that most of the data I was coming across was pretty dirty. So this gave me the idea that I could use this data and data that probably other people have come across and needed to clean as part of the challenge. And I also wanted to focus on data that I found interesting and yeah, sort of create an output that I think other people may want to then use in their viz making. So let's dive into what ESG data actually is. So as I sort of mentioned, ESG stands for environmental, social and governance, and it determines the environmental efficiency, sustainability and social responsibility of a company or organization. So we've got the environmental branch of ESG, and this thinks about the environmental aspects of a company or organization. So it's asking questions such as, what is a company doing to protect the environment, or how is it reducing its overall impact on the environment? And examples of this branch of the data could be data on carbon emissions, data on water usage, data on energy consumption. And then you've got the social branch of ESG, and this looks at the social interactions of a company or organization. So this is sort of considering how they're being sustainable through communicated methods, but also what are they doing to improve lives? How do they value their employees? How do they value sort of communities at large and uphold general social values? So examples of this data could include data on human rights and labour standards, on diversity and equal opportunities, and data on the gender pay gap. And then our final branch of ESG, the governance. So it sort of refers to the government of an organisation or company, and thinking about how they manage and execute their activities. And this considers factors such as business ethics, corruption, and general management. And examples of this could include data on conflicts within a company, or also data on the political lobbying activities of a company or organisation. So we can think of ESG at the business level with a bit more of a narrow focus, sort of data that's related directly to a company or organisation, or we can think of it a bit more broadly in terms of a wider social and environmental contexts, which combined with other data can further sort of explain the sustainability of a company or organisation. So an example I like to think of is if we have like a company that's got lots of factories along a river, for example, and they're polluting the waterways, we can think of the data directly relating to what pollutants are going into the water, how much pollutants go into the water, or we can also think a little bit more broadly and think about who's living along that river, what's the population density of the communities who are being affected by those pollutants, what type of communities are there, and what is that company doing to mitigate those issues. So yeah, I think it's nice to think about ESG in both a narrow and sort of a bit more of a broad sense. And yeah, this image I think is quite good as of demonstrating how ESG relates to the Sustainable Development Goals. So ESG has developed as a response to increasing calls for companies and organisations to play a more significant role in creating a sustainable future. And yeah, it can be seen as a form of implementation of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And these goals really underpin the ESG values. So I think this demonstrates quite nicely how those different goals fit into the environmental, social, and sort of governance branches. Now, why is ESG data important? So ESG data can be used to create a score that evaluates a company or organization's overall performance and sustainability based on the sort of principles we've talked about. So a good score indicates that a company is dedicated to being more sustainable, both environmentally and socially. And this has increased benefits such as innovation, productivity, and profitability. And realistically, I think probably a company with a good ESG score is likely to be a nicer company to work for. And then a bad score indicates that a company is doing very little to be sustainable, and it doesn't really value employees or communities. So this is something it's important for companies to think about, because if they have a good score, this is a great signal for investors and other employees and customers, and yeah, it can really improve the productivity of that company. And another reason why ESG data is important is that it measures transparency, a sort of trust, and it holds organizations accountable. So we can think of this in terms of greenwashing, which is sort of where a company says that they're doing these amazing things to help the environment, that they're being very sustainable, carbon neutral, whatever. But actually, when you look at the data, that's not the case. And sort of an ESG score is a way to help hold organizations accountable, and to see if they're actually doing what they say they're doing. So why do we need to clean ESG data? As I sort of touched on, ESG is important for companies, organizations, and the wider world in general. It signifies a commitment to sustainability and sort of being more environmentally conscious. And it can tell us a lot about the running of a business or even a country. However, publicly available ESG data is often poorly recorded and not in a usable format, in the sense that we can pull it straight into Tableau and sort of start getting analysis out of it. And this really reduces the overall impact of the data. Because ESG data, it provides us with an opportunity to tell an interesting story about the data. So it's important that we can access it in a format that will actually allow us to do that. And I think if we consider one of the key components of ESG is to improve transparency, it's imperative that that data is usable, because there's not so much point in having the data if we can't use it to ask and answer questions. So moving on to the prepping data challenge that I have created. So as I mentioned, I was looking through the ESG data page on the World Bank Open Data page, and looking for data for a personal project. And I wanted to use population data, but I found that it required quite a bit of cleaning up. So I sort of used this as the basis for the challenge. And this was a great starting point, but I sort of wanted to incorporate a little bit more data. And I started thinking about what other ESG-related measures a user may want to build or extract from this data. So going back to the example that I was saying before about the waterways and thinking about population, who's being affected by pollutants coming from a factory, a useful measure in that context would be population density. So I started thinking about how I can get population density out of this population data. And I acquired a secondary data set on country and area size. And wanted to create a population density measure. And I decided that the endpoint of my challenge would be to find the most densely populated countries. However, to get to this point, obviously, you needed to clean the data. So this is the population data. Now, there's a few things that are sort of screaming at me at first. We've got 3 rows at the top, which are sort of not really holding any useful information. They're actually just being a bit of a pain, really, because it's meaning that our headers aren't going to be read as headers. And then within the data, we've got some trailing spaces. We've got sort of data that isn't being read as the right format. And we've also got, our data is very wide. So we can see our year values are going across instead of down. So what we really want is 1 column for year, 1 column for the population value. This is not what we have right now. And then the second data set I had, this countries by total area, a little bit worse. This, as you can see, we've got multiple values, multiple fields within a column. So our area in kilometers and miles squared are in the same column. And these are separated by brackets, which means that this is being read as text rather than a numerical value. And this will cause us issues further down the line. Similarly, our countries, we've got some text in there that we don't need. We've got a rank, which has some missing values, and we've got some other fields that we don't really want. So this is where Tableau Prep comes in. So why did I choose to use Tableau Prep to clean the data? I find Tableau Prep really intuitive. It's got lots of inbuilt features which allow you to quickly clean data. For example, removing punctuation and splitting values. And it also has the data interpreter, which I'll show you guys in a little bit. And this reduces a lot of legwork as well. But I really like how intuitive it is, and it makes data preparation a lot more accessible. Especially if we think about ESG data, a lot of people looking at it may not necessarily have a background in sort of data analysis, but Tableau Prep does make that preparation step a lot more accessible, and in turn makes ESG data more accessible. And then I really love how visual the changes you make are when you're sort of preparing your data. It really, Prep allows you to visualize these changes one by one, and for me that's really useful in sort of making sure that how I'm transforming the data is how I actually want to be transforming the data, and that I'm not sort of making too many errors, or any errors at all. Because you can see as you're going along sort of how that data is transforming. It's not a surprise at the end that you realize you've done something wrong. And then one of the other great things about Tableau Prep is that you can dynamically prepare your data. So this is something that I wanted to incorporate in the challenge was parameters. I wanted users to be able to select different years. So if they're thinking about population density change, they could select 2 different years and look at the change between that. And the ability to do this is really useful when you're working with big data. So you can keep all your data in one place, but you can output the little screenshot, the snapshot of that data that you want. And this will improve your running time in Tableau when you bring it forward to analyze that data. So now I'm just going to move into Tableau Prep, and I'm going to show you some of the cleaning steps that I took with that data that I've just shown you. to get it in a usable format. So I'm just going to start with a little clean step. And as I said before, we have those 3 rows that are preventing our data headers from being read as headers. So as you can see here, these are coming through as just sort of the column names from Excel, which is not what we want at all. And there's a few ways we could go about changing this that require quite a lot of effort. But Tableau Prep has an inbuilt feature which will really quickly allow us to do this. And that is the data interpreter, which you can find just here. So if I go back and click use the data interpreter, Tableau Prep will basically look at the data and sort of intuitively push those headers up to where I want them to be. So if we go back now, we can see that the headers are now being read as the date values, which is what we want. So this is a great start. And now, as I said before, I'm going to start with the population data and then move on to the country data. So we've got a very wide data set right now, but we want 2 columns. We want one for years and one for the population value. So what I'm going to do is just pivot the data. And I'm sure some of you have noticed that I'm not documenting this. If I was doing this outside of presenting, I would be documenting these steps. But for now, I'm just going to leave them without titles. So yeah, onto the pivoting. What I want to do is just select all these values, all these date fields, and pivot them so that I get one column with the year and one column with the population value. And that's literally, it's so quick and easy. And I can just rename these. I'm going to call that one year. I'm going to call this one population. And I want to change my year value to a numeric field. So I want it to be a whole value. And yeah, that was a really quick and easy step to take our data from being very wide to much longer. I've also got a few fields here that I don't really need, so I'm just going to quickly remove those like that. And here we have our sort of 3 columns that we do want. However, there are a few more cleaning steps that we need to apply to it before it will be in the usable format to join it with the country data. So we've got our countries here, but I'm not sure exactly if they're in the right format. So what I'm going to do is change this from a string value to country or region. So Tableau Prep is going to look at these and it's going to determine which ones fit into that country region bracket, which ones don't. So I can see that here, for example, we've got Arab world referring to a region as opposed to a country, which has been given a little flag. So this is a great way of sort of just seeing if everything in that field fits into what you want it to be. And then the final step I'm going to take with this, I'm just going to group some values because I know that I have some countries that are spelled in the same way, but have accents in, for example. So again, Tableau Prep, very intuitive. It will just do that for you. You can group values by spelling. And I will just show you. We've got the Virgin Islands here, for example, which have been pushed together because Tableau Prep has recognized that this is referring to the same thing and grouped them together. And that's all I needed to do with the population data. Moving on to the country data, we've got a little bit more work here to clean it up. So to start with, I'm just going to remove some of the fields that I didn't want, which I think is just these 4. And then we're going to move on to cleaning up this area size of the different countries. So I want to split out these values because currently I've got kilometers squared and miles squared in the same column. And there's 2 ways I could do this. I could do an automatic split where Tableau Prep will do it for me. And you can see what that looks like. It split it into 2, which is great, what we wanted. But I actually just want the kilometers squared. So what I'm going to do is just do a custom split where I'm just going to split it on the bracket and take the first field just to get this kilometer squared value going down the left. I'm going to split that, and super easy, that comes straight out. I can remove the field that I no longer need. I can rename it just a kilometer squared, and then make sure that it is a numerical value. And yeah, I hope you guys can see how quick and easy that was to change that from something that's quite messy to a numerical field that is then usable. And again, I just want to clean my country and dependency field. Where's that gone? There we go. the same way that I did with the other data set, so that when I join these, those countries are going to align and they're going to match up. So I'm, like before, I'm going to change this to a country region data role. And Prep has sort of flagged up some of the territories that aren't really falling in those brackets, which is fine. And then I'm going to group the values again by spelling. And what we can see here is that we've got a few values that are being, we don't want that there. We've got a few values that are being grouped together, which is really useful. And then, I don't know, in the other data set, we had the Channel Islands, but in this data set, I've got Jersey and Guernsey floating around. So I want to group those together, but obviously they're spelled differently. So again, another way that we can group things together is by manual selection. So I'm just going to go down and I'm going to find Jersey, which is just here. Guernsey even, which is just here. And then I'm going to group that together with Jersey, just there. And we can call this the Channel Islands. And this means that when I group it with the other data set, it's going to be read together. Now there's one more step, which actually, what Carl was mentioning before about having the histograms. Going down this list here, I can see that I've got one row, which is my Channel Islands, which has got 2 rows in it as opposed to 1. So that's one of the great things about Tableau Prep, is that it's giving you a snapshot onto your data without you having to go row by row. And what this is telling me is that I'm going to have to aggregate it before I can join them together, because I just want 1 row per country. So I can just go to the aggregate step and group by the country dependency. Oh, not that one. And summarize the land in mass. So that will take us from, what we've got, 254 rows here to 253 rows here. And now our data is ready to be joined together. So I'm just going to join these 2 together like so. And I'm going to join them by country. And again, this is something that's great about Prep, is how easily it visualizes these changes for you. I can quickly select on this excluded field to see what things aren't being included in that join. So if you have values in there that you're not expecting to see, this is where you can find it, which is something that I really value, because in some of the other preparation tools that we use, you don't have the ability to sort of quickly see how your data is being joined and what values are being excluded. So yeah, that is everything I did in the cleaning part of the Tableau and the Prep and Data Challenge that I created. And as you can see now, we've got a data set with land in kilometers squared, year, population, and country name. And this is ready to be taken into Tableau and to be used within visualizations. In just a few steps, it's gone from 2 data sets that were quite messy to 1 data set that's in a usable format and that we can actually extract some analysis from. So before I end this sort of presentation, I just wanted to show you a couple places where you can find ESG related data. So the first is the ESG data portal on the World Data Bank. And this is a great portal for finding ESG indicators. You can search ones you look, search for ones that you'd like to find, or you can go and explore the ESG framework. And here, the World Bank have sort of curated lots of different data sets and put them under the environmental, social and governance sort of brackets. So this is a great place to find ESG data if you want to use it within your own viz making and your own analysis. And then the second link, this is where I got the population data from. So if we just search population, we can see that there's tons and tons of data sets on here relating to population. And this is the one that I got the data from. And yeah, it's a really great site for finding ESG related data. And there's one final thing that I wanted to point out, is that you can download this in both a CSV and an Excel format. Now, originally when I was doing the creating the challenge, I downloaded it in a CSV format. And I was finding actually that the data interpreter in Tableau Prep, the little tool that sort of made the headers be read as headers, didn't work when I had it as a CSV. So after a little bit of trial and error, I then downloaded it as an Excel file and found that the data interpreter did work. So I think I just want to leave this sort of presentation on that note, is that with both data preparation and data analysis, if things don't work the first time around, that doesn't mean that they're not going to work. Sometimes it just takes a little bit of thinking outside the box, being creative, and sort of trying different ways of reaching that sort of end goal that you may not have thought about at first, but hopefully will put you down the right path. So yeah, thank you everyone for listening, and I hope you found this interesting and learned some things about ESG data. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Serena. I really think it's like super interesting how passionate you are about ESG, and that really comes through. Super knowledgeable. Yeah, Carl's just linking to the Prep and Data challenge there in the chat that you can go and try, because as you mentioned, there are some extra steps that you can go on to finish off that challenge. So you got the sneak peek on how to start the challenge, but yeah. We can do that. It doesn't look like there are any questions in the chat at the moment for you, Serena. But my question is around with the ESG data. So I'm curious, how often do they kind of update ESG data? I think that the latest year there was like 2021. Is that like something that's a challenge in the field?
Yeah, so it does depend. I think with publicly available data, that's obviously looking at the country level. I know when I was looking for, I think it was fertility rates, some of the most recent records were from sort of 2018, 2019. So when it's sort of, I think if it's relating directly to a business or a corporation, that's depends on the company organization. Hopefully that's a lot more up to date. But when it's data relating to sort of countries, obviously different countries have different ability to sort of collect and report that data, and also have different sort of ideas around how they should do that. So I think, again, it depends on the indicator. So things like population, I think, is recorded a lot more frequently, but definitely other indicators, particularly relating to gender and things like that, there's a bit more of a lag. So yeah, don't be alarmed if you're sort of downloading that data and you're finding that the most recent year is 2016. It's probably because that was the most recent year that sort of it was all collated.
Yeah, no, that absolutely makes sense. Like, it's difficult enough sometimes in a business to have everyone reporting things at the same time. So yeah, when you're going across the world, obviously there's going to be a lot more variation. Oh, great. Thank you so much again for presenting today, Serena. You did a fantastic job. So well done on your debut at Tableau User Groups.
Thank you.
And then to everyone else, thank you so much for joining us today, whether it was early, whether it was late for you. We really appreciate everyone being able to come and join. I will share this recording so that if there's anyone that you know who had to drop out, or if anyone, any of your colleagues would be interested, then please share. And yeah, thank you very much and have a good day, everyone.